Fantastic. Welcome back, everybody, to our Just Two Dads podcast. I am Brian Altunian, here with my partner in Thrive, Mr. Sean Francis. Good afternoon, Sean.
Good afternoon.
Good to see you. Good to see you. Good to see you. Every week we get together and have conversations, just two dads, parents of special needs children, get together and talk about the things that are important to us. And in our conversations over the last several years, we have encountered such phenomenal people who service the special needs community, who are warriors in bringing the generosity of spirit, generosity of time and effort to the special needs community in a whole variety of ways. And today's guest is another one that we're very excited to talk about. Every week, Dan, I say we're very excited, but the reality is I get excited when we talk to our guests, because we're fascinated by the work that you are doing, that the folks that we've had on the show are doing, and we're grateful to be part of this community that Sean and I, and you are as a dad as well, you know, this is a community that we didn't choose. This was not a voluntary membership drive. We didn't choose to be in this community yet. Right. We're members of this community by default, and still fascinated by the folks who are doing phenomenal stuff. So can't wait to have that conversation with you. And before we get launching into this, I think our audience is gonna get tremendous value out of today, because you're doing such great work. But for those of you who are watching us live on Facebook, welcome. We have some regular followers on our show, and for those that are listening in audio on podcast form, we've just found out we're now on about 14 different outlets, which is amazing, because we started this about 6 months ago as two guys just talking about stuff, and we're grateful for the reach and for our partner companies that we're delivering content to. And now, in addition to Apple Podcasts and Google Podcast and Audible and Spotify and Stitcher, we're also on the radio down at the U.S. Virgin Islands on WSTX AM radio. So grateful for the listeners who listen in to us every week, and hope that we bring tremendous value. So welcome, everybody. Dan, welcome. Sean Francis.
Thank you.
My friend, my dear friend. How you doing today? How's today?
I am. It's like you say. I'm so excited about today's show. To be able to say that every week is really, really a blessing. And for me, I'm saying that through challenges / gifts. My wife and I, we in the fight, not even the fight, the challenge, and sometimes gift that is autism. Autism got a couple good right hooks in last night. So Elijah went to bed at, I can't even tell you what time it was. We'll put it this way, the whole day got thrown off, didn't work out, that kind of thing. But then, what I did, you try to be present as a person. You'd like to think that you're conscious. As a result of our guest last week and our conversation with him, I found myself paying even more attention to my level of patience, not always with success, but most definitely this morning. And, coming through a challenge like that, which leads me into our great conversation today with Dan Habib, who is a special needs dad and a filmmaker. We are so glad to have you with us. Dan, welcome.
Thank you so much, Sean and Brian. Been looking forward to this, and I'm excited for the conversation.
Yes. Good. Us too. And I've been fortunate. I've seen some of your stuff. Sean, I think you've seen some of Dan's material as well. People are going to want to see the stuff that you're doing. It really is phenomenal work. It's so heartfelt. It's so authentic. And we're going to have links in the chat. Sean Hall, our producer extraordinaire, who's in Hawaii, who supports our efforts here from Hawaii every week. He's just we love this man. He's going to be supporting by putting your links out there on our chat as well. So, Sean, why don't you kick it off and start off, let's ask Dan some compelling questions.
My pleasure and honor. So Dan, you're a filmmaker, you're a special needs dad, you've brought the two together for purpose. And like many of us and the people that, are on our show, you've turned a challenge into what is your superpower. But as I was explaining to you backstage beforehand, a lot of how we deal with the challenge that is faced upon us with a diagnosis of special needs, whether it's a delay or a catastrophic injury or whatever the case may be, how we respond to that and our ability to turn it into something great is always based on, how we were raised. So tell us a little bit about yourself, where how you were brought up and what led you to be able to deal with the challenges as you do.
Sure. Wow. Deal with the challenges every day, as you say, brings different challenges, but then different amazing opportunities and beauty. So I'll just say I grew up in New Jersey. I grew up in a community that did not, I would say, do a great job of including kids with disabilities in school. So since I'm not a person with a disability, I had no exposure to disability rights, inclusive education, my entire upbringing. It was the kids down the hallway in that room, for the most part. I remember when I was quite young, there was this one kid who had a headband all the time because he had some ear surgery, and he was like the kid with the headband. That was the big difference.
Right.
And now I laugh because that's such a small difference compared to the differences in my own family. But but growing up, even going to college, I went to the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and there were huge civil rights movements going on at that time. I'm 55 now, and so this was anti-apartheid movements were going on, divestment from South Africa. There were gay rights movements, women's rights movements. Never did I hear about disability rights. So, right through meeting my wife, Betsy, when we were young, 21, 22, we had our first child, Isaiah, and he was a typical kid. In fact, he's the kid that started walking and talking at like age 10 months. So he was the one who was ahead of the curve, and we figured, all right, that's the bar. That's been set. Our kids are going to be motoring at that point. And then just like you guys, when we had our son Samuel, which was in 1999, everything changed. And it wasn't right away. For a few months, things were totally normal. But for reasons we can talk about over the podcast, things started developing at like 3-4 months in a very different way. And long story short, we realized at about age 1 that Sam would have a significant lifelong disability. So that's how kind of I came to understand disability, and then the rest of the last 20 years has been an incredible and kind of complicated journey, which we can talk more. Anything else you want to know about?
Sure.
But I think what's interesting is, and I really am anxious for you to get into the story about Samuel, because some people and I remember for me when we had that first diagnosis, and you think again it's going to be a lifelong disability, we automatically go to the worst possible things that can happen. And our doctors are not helpful in that. They tell us all of the list of the never do's, never wills, right? Your child's never going to do this, never will have that. And it's such a horrible place to be. And yet the thing about children with special needs is they compensate for where there's some shortcomings in their, in their abilities, and compensate by being phenomenal. Jordan, who's, I know she's on she's probably watching in right now. Jordan was told all the things that she never was going to be able to do, and now she's, a young woman, 25 years old. She's married. She has a job. She's, drives a car. She, lived alone before she got married. All the stuff that we were told she'd never do. So she's accomplished, and we're so proud as parents. But I think Samuel is such an amazing child, and I think the thing that people need to understand is, especially when their children are still young and they don't know what the future is going to look like. Having examples of success and it just provides so much hope and some positive forecasting. So if you can tell us about Samuel's diagnosis and I also want to hear how I know I always give Sean a hard time about asking multiple questions in one question. So I'll just do 2. One, I definitely want you to talk about Samuel, but how you took your professional work and turned that together with Samuel into amazing content for the world.
Well, thanks. I mean, first of all, I think, Brian, you would agree, and perhaps Sean, where we are now in our journey is really different than where we were when the kids were very, very young. And I really want to honor that, because there may be parents listening right now who have 1 or 2 or 3-year-old kids who are just coming to terms with the whole notion of a life that's a different path than they thought they would have. And it's really scary. And not only did we think Samuel was going to have a lifelong disability, we didn't know how long he was going to live. And to be perfectly honest, we still have uncertainty to some extent around that. I mean, he has a very rare and complex genetic disorder called GNAO1, neurodevelopmental disorder. There's only about 300 people in the world that have that. And we only got the diagnosis in March of 2019. So for 19 years, we didn't even know why Samuel had a disability. We just had this global kind of cerebral palsy diagnosis. Samuel's used a wheelchair since he was really young. He uses a communication device. He he has a feeding tube, he's got seizures, and he's in college, and he graduated from high school, and he is looking hard for a girlfriend right now through Hinge and Bumble and all these different platforms. He's traveled all over the country. You know, he presents, he's a filmmaker. So anyway, there's a lot I can tell you about Samuel, but I think that what happened was when Sam was very young, Betsy and I were first in this place of, as you probably were, complete uncertainty, fear, confusion, overwhelmingness, and that did not resolve in a day or 5 days or a week or a month. It was a slow process. And one of the things we decided early on that we would do as a couple is not freak out more than 6 months out, not worry more than 6 months out, because the future is just so overwhelming to think about. What's middle school going to be like when he can't talk or walk or hold a pencil? How's he going to graduate from high school? How's he going to have friends? You know, it's so easy to go down that path. And we said the only way we're going to get through this is to worry short term and think short term. But we also did a leadership training when he was about 2 and 3 years old. In back-to-back years, my wife found this incredible leadership training that's part of a national model called Partners in Policymaking. And many of your listeners who live in the States or even the territories could go to the Partners in Policymaking website and find where they might have one in their region. It was like disability boot camp, disability rights boot camp for us.
Wow.
And it got us thinking about this whole notion that really what's important is that Samuel has a sense of belonging, that he feels like he belongs in our family, in our community, and most certainly in our own local school, because we couldn't imagine him feeling a true sense of belonging without feeling a sense of belonging in his own school. So Brian, to kind of circle back to one of your questions, around that time, after I did that leadership program, I started making the film Including Samuel, which was my first documentary. I was a photojournalist for 20 years full time before becoming a filmmaker. And the thing that really triggered it was Samuel got very sick. He got pneumonia after having a tonsillectomy. He aspirated some blood, had pneumonia, and he was in the ICU for about 2 weeks when he was about 3.5 years old. Wow. And his neurologist, this incredible neurologist, who's still one of his neurologists, turned to me when he had stabilized and said, you know, have you ever thought of telling the story of your own family and what it's like to be a parent of a child with a chronic health condition or disability? And I hadn't, because I'd always focused on other people, but I started taking pictures in the hospital just to burn off that fear and that incredible stress I was feeling. Sure. And that's what led me down this path of documenting our life. And then I decided to do it as a film, and that launched me into filmmaking. So I don't know if I answered both of your questions. But that's some context.
So just on that first film, so talk about that film a little bit. It's called Introducing Samuel.
Yeah, Including Samuel.
Including
Samuel. Yeah.
And it's about inclusion in the schools, right? Because it was the whole how school, and there are some phenomenal. Gosh, I definitely want you to talk about. Sorry, Sean, I've totally taken over this interview. Okay. Talk about that, because there are some phenomenal people who are building educational inclusion programs, some within a more mainstream school, but some that are specific to schools, this inclusion program.
Yeah, I mean, inclusion, and just to clarify my own perspective, inclusion is not a program so much as it is just a way of seeing education. You know, education to me, there's 30 years of research now in this country, and I've learned this through my work and through doing this leadership series, 30 years of research that show that kids with disabilities who are included in regular education have better outcomes statistically. I mean, there's just really little doubt in terms of their academic outcomes, social outcome, behavior, post-secondary success, emotional and behavioral. Now, that's not to say that every parent's going to make the same decisions we did, but I'll say this: it's not so much about the kid that determines whether a kid can be included or not. It's the environment, it's the school, and it's a level of support and belief that school has that every child deserves the opportunity to be in a regular classroom. And that should be the starting point, with the supports they need to be successful. And the only time you remove that child from full-time in the regular education classroom is when they're just not successful with all the support. So I say that because we got to know the research, we got to know that reality early on in Samuel's life, and then we advocated in our school district. Thankfully, they were already pretty inclusive. We had to push them at times.
That was my next question.
Yeah, we had to do some, but I'll say that they were pretty. They started with a good baseline, but you know, unfortunately, I hear stories all over the country when I travel and do filmmaking and do presentations of families that are told their kindergartner can't go to a regular kindergarten because they have Down syndrome or they have autism. Like at the very get-go, they're being told, no, your child is not welcome. I mean, kindergarten is the most universally designed, like, you know,
Right.
level of school. How can you say that this kid can't be included in kindergarten? But that sets the path for the rest of their educational career. So including Samuel uses Samuel's story and our story as a family of really believing in inclusion and the incredible experience he had being included in school. And he's kind of a tour guide through this film and his experience to introduce you to 4 other families that are varying degrees of age and disability and experiences in life. So you meet these other people who are dealing with other issues too, schizophrenia, autism, and have their own experience in education. So it's a film that I just made because I felt like I had to, but it ended up being translated into 17 languages and broadcast on PBS and is now used all over the world as a catalyst for inclusive education. So it's been an amazing surprise kind of how that took off.
It's beautiful. And you've done follow-ups with those subjects as well, right? Those subjects that were included in that film, you've done.
To an extent, I haven't done major film work, but we've done like reunion screenings where we've had everyone come together. We've co-presented at many events. And one of the subjects, Keith Jones, who's an incredible disability rights advocate, hip hop artist, a really awesome guy. He's going to be the subject, one of the subjects of the new film that I'm sure we'll talk about that we're working on now.
Love that. Beautiful.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Sean, I've taken over. I know you've got like a list of questions you want to ask.
No, that's okay. So the film when did the film come out?
It was broadcast on PBS in 2009, but it's still being out there all the time. It's on all the streaming platforms, and it's available pretty broadly. But we put a lot of I'm based at a nonprofit at the Institute on Disability at the University of New Hampshire, so we do a lot of our work. It's just free. It's just we want to get it out there. The major films people might need to rent for a couple bucks on Amazon, like my major feature-length documentaries. But if you go to any of the websites that I know you'll be sharing, we put tons of videos up there for free, short films, educational material. So there's a lot of stuff that people can access.
So Sean Hall put the link to Including Samuel up on our chat.
Right.
So.
I was going to ask, what would some of those sites be outside of the actual site, includingsamuel.com?
So I've done kind of 4 major films at this point, including Samuel. My second film, when I started traveling with Including Samuel, I started meeting a lot of families and educators who talked about kids with emotional and behavioral disabilities, which could, as you know, could be anything from a mental health issue, like bipolar or something. Autism, obviously, as you know, Sean, can generate behaviors that can be challenging at times, like many other disabilities. I probably don't have to convince you about that. And so I put that in that larger group of how do we support students who have what I would call more hidden disabilities, not as much visual disabilities in regular education. But also students who have ADHD, students who have post-traumatic stress from a lot of different issues, whether that's childhood violence, sexual assault. Unfortunately, we know that's a big reality. My film, Who Cares About Kelsey, features a high school student named Kelsey Carroll, who had a pretty traumatic childhood for reasons you can kind of explore through the film. But she talks very openly about her sexual abuse that she endured, her family's history of drug abuse, things like that, and her ADHD. But it shows how a high school, in such a proactive way, helped her be successful and graduate and go on to really good things. So there's that film, and that has its own website. And then
another great story, by the way. She's phenomenal, and your access to her family and to her living and her situation with her boyfriend at the time and school, and I mean such a compelling story and heartbreaking at the same time too, to know that people are dealing with these challenges that we just don't even acknowledge sometimes in society, that what people are dealing with behind their own closed doors of their families. So it was another beautiful film.
Thanks. I mean, as I said, I was a photojournalist for 20 years, and I learned that the only way you can get inside people's lives is to spend a lot of time with them, develop trust, make them feel invested in the project, make them feel like they're a part of it, that they're empowered by it, that they understand the outcomes. And I've told every subject I've filmed from the very beginning, you have power here. You can tell me to turn off my camera. You can tell me to put down my camera. This is about us working collaboratively, but I need to make this a really honest story. And to do that, I need to show that argument with your boyfriend. I'm filming you when you're weeping because you just broke up with your boyfriend, or you just failed a class that you've worked so hard to pass, or you're dealing with a difficult relationship in your family. And people understand that once you spend months and months and months with them, and which I did with Kelsey. I filmed over 2 years.
Wow.
And it's no holds barred, and she is raw and authentic, and she puts it all out there. That's again another amazing project.
I've got an observation and a question. The observation first is just that when you talked about what it is that Samuel wanted in terms of being noticed, being knowing they mattered, inclusion, things of that sort. That's where, you know, we like to say that, you know, there is no such thing as special needs, because everybody needs the same thing. The only thing that's different is maybe the quantity that one might need, but everybody needs to know that they matter. Everybody needs to know that they're included and that they count. And then my question is, you know, when you were talking about the experience of filmmaking, especially from the standpoint of a documentary, I've thought in many cases with my own family, because we have such a diverse mix and everything. You know, there's 9 of us. The oldest has, you know, moved out. You know, my wife and I became legal guardians too, and then eventually adopted my sister-in-law's 4 children, in addition to my daughter having 2 daughters from her previous marriage, and then our son Elijah. And I thought, you know, of, you know, we like to think of adding value. So we think of, you know, what would it be like if somebody was filming, you know, our lives? I have strike a balance between, would somebody get something out of that? That would be gratifying. But, you know, the balance is between that, and the other feeling is, I don't want anybody up in here all in our business. So yeah. My question is then, you know, how was your wife when you started? Because the first film you did under these circumstances was with your own family. Was she like, yeah, sign me up? And then like, oh my gosh, or, you know.
Oh, it's really funny you asked that, because that was quite a negotiation process.
That was a long wind-up too. Sorry, but
it's actually a really great question. So initially, it was going to be like this general film about inclusion, and Sam was just like one of many things I was filming. And then one of my very dear friends, who's a photojournalist, saw like a early cut or something. She said, Sam was your story. Like you have access to him. He's incredible. You have to make him the centerpiece of the story. So I started honing more and more on Samuel. And then my editor, my film editor, said, you got to interview your wife. I mean, you got to get her perspective in here. And she said, all right, I'll do it. Even though she was reluctant about this whole notion, because she's a much more private person than I am, of opening our whole family up. But I'm going to do it like off camera, like in our car. And the only quiet we could get was in our car, like a busy household, right? So I remember doing this really powerful interview, and I sent it to my editor. He's like, no, you need her on camera. She's like, all right, pour the wine, you know? And then she sat and gave me the most incredibly beautiful interview. But even during the filmmaking process, there was a lot of growth that we both had to do about how public we were willing to be about our lives. And I'm more of an outgoing kind of public person. It took her longer to feel comfortable with that. And I don't think it was until we started seeing the impact of the film that she didn't have any regrets. You know, all of us were like, oh my God, this film is actually changing hearts and minds about people with disabilities. And not to overstate it or pat myself on the back, but it really became something unto itself, you know, it just through word of mouth. And I think that, and now we look back and it's like, that was so worth it. And she's become an incredible disability rights advocate. She's on boards. She's really out there as well, writing columns for the newspaper. But it was not an immediate process that we were ready to do that. And you know, I think for any family, you have to come to terms with like, how public do we want to be? Like, not everybody is Chrissy Teigen and John Legend, you know, like tweeting and Instagramming everything you do, right?
Everything,
like, right? Not everybody wants to be that way, and I respect that. And I'm not that public every day in my life, but you know, there are moments where you say, maybe by sharing something, it can empower other people and help them figure out their own struggles and navigate their lives a little bit.
Well, and with you, I mean, she's a warrior too. She is, you know, you could see she's the strength behind, you know, the family, you know, really the strength behind the family. And I think it's a position where you're telling the story out front, but you know, that's only successful if you have somebody like your wife supporting the back end, really. And
I agree, and of course she's like the backbone of our family. But I would say that there was a moment that really was illuminating for us during that process, which is I had a rough cut of the film that included some scenes of Sam in the hospital from that time I talked about earlier when he was in the ICU. And at first, my wife Betsy was like, "Why are we putting this in there? Why are we putting this health stuff in?" And one of our very dear friends, who's known us for a long time, saw it. She said, you have to share that. You have to share the ups and downs, or the film is not going to resonate with people unless you're honest about that. It's not all sugar and spice. You know, there's like some really, really difficult moments in your life. And if you don't share that, that doesn't validate the experience that other people are having in their own lives. You have to validate the ups and downs.
We have the same dynamic at home, which is why I asked that. For instance, the business that Brian and I, have and do outside of this, our practice in financial services, this show, this, anything I begin to do, I'm part of a great team, which is why I'm able to do that. But I'm up front. My wife is on social media, but her account doesn't look like mine or anything like that. But even though I'm more out front, I am generally speaking, a private person. So that's why I asked that, because I'm thinking of, the two. And I think there's something to be said for vulnerability, and there's something to be said for striking a balance between vulnerability and sensationalism. It's worthwhile to share a problem if we're looking to get input for a solution, or share how we found a solution and have come through it, as opposed to just, I stubbed my toe today and I have no idea what I'm going to do. It might fall off. There's so much of that that takes place anyway. So it's not to be taken lightly. So thank you.
There's also, and there's also related, of course, I mean, there's also a related piece that's really important to talk about, which is putting our kids out there in very public ways. And, when Samuel was young, we took the leap and decided to do this. And obviously he was 4, 5, 6, 7 years old. It's hard for him to understand the concept of like real high public exposure at that point, although he was very supportive at the time and excited about it, and has always been. So thankfully he likes the film, he likes the impact. But now that he's 21, and even in the years preceding this, we have made sure to give him not just about film work, but in every aspect of his life. We've worked hard to create self-determination for him and support his self-determination. And actually, when Sam was quite young, at like 3 years old, I interviewed a guy named Bob Williams, who's an incredible man, who's in our new film that we're working on. He's a high-level administrator in Washington, D.C. under Health and Human Services. He served under Obama, under Clinton, and he uses a wheelchair and a communication device. He's a really amazing guy. And I said to Bob, like, what advice do you have for me as a parent of this 3-year-old child? He said, give him choices at every juncture. Just always give him choices about his life. Always allow him to make decisions about his life in any way you possibly can. And I think that self-determination, it far exceeds the film work we're doing. It's really about every aspect of his life, about whether he's going to have a major surgery like he's had to make decisions about in recent years, or whether he's going to go to college, or whether he's going to take the risk to go to the homecoming dance by himself, at Stag, and not have a date. I mean, all those are big decisions that we've tried to encourage him to make.
I just thought I was just going to say real quick, I just thought of something. Sorry, Brian. I think for anybody that's listening that is a special needs parent, and this might even be bigger than the special needs realm, which is that let's stick to special needs. If you dare to be a warrior, which you are by default, and use your skill, your heart, or whatever, for the purpose of enriching your child's life and raising your child, that's one thing. If you dare to step outside of that and try to enrich the life of others by your example and everything, it is not an easy task, and you should be told beforehand that it won't be easy. But for those that are going to appreciate what you do and wonder where you were, it's so worth it. You have got me thinking of what you're doing. This is why I love what we do. You're reaffirming what we do, and then me as an individual. My wife got some signs for learning and stuff like that to keep Elijah on task. So it says, it's got his schedule for the day and everything. And we had it for a couple months actually. And I just took a picture of it and posted it. And I said, not every day goes as we like, but we try every day. And most of the parents posted and said, oh my gosh, that's so great. Where did your wife get the materials and everything? And one or two people said, that's what time he eats. Oh, I could never do that. I could never get up that early. I could do so and so. And then I responded. I thought about it. And to be honest, myself, not too long ago, I would have just been like, oh, a little crush. Maybe I should remove it. And I said, I'm sure no one meant anything by it. But just keep in mind, as you see these responses, I'm not worried for myself, because I expect, things to not always, have agreement, and it stung a little. But the main thing is, I don't want anybody else in the Facebook group that I belong to see this and get discouraged from posting something. So if you're going to, if you have a comment that encourages, that's fine, or a question, but just be careful about where that takes place. So that's my way of saying that for you to step forth into the light and do what you do, it's immeasurable. Thank you.
Thank you. I was going to ask you, Dan, you mentioned, so we talked about the first 2 films, and then the other 2 films that you've completed. To talk about those for a second. And I think we've put, I think Sean has put the Inclusive Communities web
Yes.
link on
He's
the
got
chat.
them in
Okay,
there.
good. But,
Yeah,
but let's talk
sure.
about the other two films so people have an idea of what you've done and then what you're working on now and other
Sure,
things.
of course. So when Sam was in high school at this point, sophomore in high school, there was a day when I was supporting him at the homecoming parade on a weekend, and he has other people that support him during the week, but we of course support him a lot as well. He needs full one-on-one support for most of life's activities, and his school principal came over. And they started talking. And what was very amazing about that moment is neither one of them could speak verbally, because Samuel speaks mostly through his communication device. He can talk, and he actually talks better now than he did a few years ago for various reasons. But his school principal had developed ALS, and he was about a year into his ALS and could no longer speak. And so I'm seeing this moment, and he was very public about it. He had, the newspaper had written stories and stuff. He was starting to raise money for the ALS Association. But I'm thinking, this can't be happening anywhere else in the country right now in the world. A student talking to his principal, and both of them are using communication devices, right?
Oh my gosh.
And I thought, maybe I should make a film here. Now, I was in the middle of making this major documentary that I'll talk about in a minute called Intelligent Lives. But I said, I think I just need to do something here. But I knew the principal, Mr. Connolly, and I knew he would only do something if it was very student-led, student-driven, because he is all about the students in the high school.
God bless him.
And so I had this conceptual idea to hand out a cue card to every single one of the 1,500 students in the school and have them write down a question they really wanted to ask Mr. Connolly about his ALS, because they had seen him go from a quote unquote typically abled person to a person with significant disabilities, using a walker, losing his ability to speak. So we narrowed it down with his collaboration to about 50 questions. And one day we set up lights and cameras and audio on a stage, and we had the students come through and ask him one question after another. And he had prepared answers in advance because it took him a long time to type up the answers. And then we had this beautiful string of interactions that in the filmmaking process. Then I filmed him in school, at home, did some like verite documentary footage. And then I got all this archival footage of him from the community access TV station and from the internal TV station that he had started at Concord High School, where we live. Anyway, I just thought it was going to be like a nice little thing for the community. Well, I gave all this material to my editor, Diego, in New York, and Diego said, this is incredible material. Like, this is a phenomenal story, and we've got to make something really great out of this. So we ended up editing what I thought was going to be about a month for about 6 months, and it became a 30-minute film called Mr. Connolly Has ALS that, to my surprise, ended up being broadcast nationally on PBS in 2018. And is now free actually on YouTube. And there's a link that people can access to, hopefully through your chat, to the YouTube channel that holds it. And anyway, that I just showed that yesterday actually for a group of school principals in Washington State that I'm doing a series for. And that film has become actually one of the most powerful stories about inclusion, because you've got a principal who believed in inclusive education, who facilitated inclusion, not just for kids with disabilities, but for all the new Americans that have come to our community as refugees from all over the world, from Africa, Syria, former Yugoslavia. He's very much around pro-sexual orientation rights, gay rights. We had the first transgender homecoming king in the country at our school.
Wow.
This like amazing inclusive teacher who worked so hard to create that culture of inclusion, and then suddenly that culture was benefiting him as a person with a disability. And I think that's why it's such a powerful film for like school administrators to see, because they're like, oh, this inclusion thing could actually benefit me someday if I ever become a person with a disability. Because we're all, there's this phrase in the disability world called like TABS, temporarily able-bodied. Have you ever heard of that? And the idea is that we're all just TABS. If we're not disabled, we'll probably all become disabled someday.
We talk about that all the time, right? Yeah, absolutely.
Or,
absolutely.
God forbid anybody should have an illness or an accident or something, all of us could be in the disability community firsthand tomorrow.
So anyway, that all the time. Yeah, we do. Yeah.
So that was, wow. I don't want to, I can talk more about Intelligent Lives, but that was the film, Mr. Connolly Has ALS, that came out in 2018. But what basically happened was I always think about like, what's the subject that I haven't taken on where there seems to be a great community, national, world need to have a discussion. And I found that people with intellectual disabilities are the most segregated group. They are students with intellectual disabilities. Only 15% of those students are included in regular education. Only 45% of them will graduate from high school. And then only 15% of adults with intellectual disabilities will be employed in a meaningful way. So those are just awful low statistics. So Intelligent Lives question really challenges that whole paradigm. And I found 3 incredible people to film that are being included in high school, transitioning to higher education and in college at Syracuse University, and then transitioning into the workforce. That's Nair, Micah, and Naomi. So that film is and Chris Cooper, the actor, the Academy Award-winning actor, came on board as an executive producer and narrator, and shares the story of his own son, Jesse, who had a significant disability, and he and his wife Marianne were incredible inclusion advocates. Actually, still are, even though Jesse passed away some years ago at age 17.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
So a couple of things, and I know that we've had some requests. So I just want to reiterate. So, Including Samuel is the first film, and people can find that at www.includingsamuel.com, SAMUEL, and then we have Who Cares About Kelsey. I love both of these films. They're just so beautiful, and that's at Who Cares About Kelsey, KELSEY.com. Just want people to be able to, if they're listening to us, that they can access this. And then there's intelligentlives.org. That's where they can find information about the film that you just mentioned, Intelligent Lives, correct? Intelligent Lives with an S, Lives. And then there's one more film, right? There's one more film.
Mr. Connolly Has ALS.org. Oh, you're getting a trend here, right?
Right. Mr. Connolly Has ALS.org. Can you spell Connolly for us, just for those who are listening?
CONNOLLY.
Great. That's perfect. Okay, good. So we want people who are listening to be able to listen in and then find this, because they're such phenomenal films. And you've covered it's funny, you've covered such a wide range of, for lack of a better word, right, disabilities. Yet there's a through line, there's a theme to all of it, which is inclusion, it's independence, it is, finding a place of belonging. I think that that's so heartwarming. And Sean and I talk about this all the time. At the end of the day, that's all anybody wants, whether they have a disability or they're neurotypical. They just want to feel like they belong someplace, right? That they're seen, that they're understood, that they belong to a community. And Dan, I will tell you, that's the one thing that you have done consistently in the work that you do. You give people a sense of hope that they can belong to the community regardless of the challenges they may be facing every day. So
thanks, Brian. And I think that one of the things I've tried to show is that belonging doesn't just, as you say, belonging is critical, and it doesn't just happen. It happens because there are really thoughtful people and really well thought out infrastructures around these people to make them feel like they belong. These people meaning all of it, people with disabilities or students with disabilities and adults. So what I mean by that is, inclusive education isn't easy. It's not easy to do it well. It takes great leadership. It takes really excellent teaching. It has to be the way we go. You can't go any other direction as far as I'm concerned in our society, but it has to be thoughtfully constructed. What we call competitive integrated employment, which means that people with disabilities having real jobs for real pay, alongside typically people with and without disabilities working alongside them. That happens because people, business people and others have high expectations and are really open to trying to hire somebody despite what they might see on the surface as being some challenges because of their disability, and realizing that statistically they're finding that people with disabilities can become among the most reliable employees. You can have the greatest retention, you have incredible job satisfaction. It's just, the unemployment rate is so high that people with disabilities who are given that opportunity often become your best employees. And in higher education, I think even colleges and higher education are realizing that diversity should include disability. We talk in higher education about diversity, as we should, around race and class and gender and sexual orientation, but we also need to talk about disability as part of the critical, diversity. So, I just making the point that all these things happen because of really great efforts on the part of the various kind of infrastructures and institutions that I'm talking about. I try and show that in the films.
And how did you end up at University of New Hampshire in this in the department that you're in and the work that you're doing now?
Yeah. So what happened was when Including Samuel came out in 2008, they were already kind of partnering with us. The leadership series I talked about earlier was run through the Institute on Disability at the University of New Hampshire, where I work now. And so my wife and I had become connected with that institute when Samuel was only 3 years old. So by the time Samuel was 8 and the film came out, we already had like this partnership with them, this friendship. So my boss of many years and my colleague to this day, Mary Shue, one day she and I basically had the idea at the same time that maybe you could come over to the Institute and be a filmmaker. And I had just covered my 5th New Hampshire primary when Obama won his first term, second term, 2008 would have been, help me out here. First or second term? First term. And yeah, so anyway, I love politics. I had just covered 5 New Hampshire primaries. You know, I had just done a lot of great work that I love doing, but I was feeling like, all right, I think I need something different. And she had this idea that I could become a filmmaker. Now, the challenge is that I don't have like core funding from the university. It's, if you know anything about soft money in universities, I need to raise all my money every year to sustain my project. We're a nonprofit, so I can get grants, donations, but it takes a lot of work to raise the money. But listen, every filmmaker has to raise money, whether you're an independent filmmaker or you work at a nonprofit. We have the advantage of being able to take tax-deductible charitable contributions, which helps. But but that's how it happened, and it's been 12 years now, and we've survived. We survived somehow. Every year, I'm able to raise the money.
Just out of curiosity, how, if anyone was, and we didn't talk about this before, you know, Brian and I usually are on the same page, but how does one contribute to that effort?
Dan and I did talk about it, and Dan and I talk about this, and I think it's such a critical question, Sean, because, you know, people want to be a part of this and want to be a part of something greater. So please, Dan, talk about that. I love this.
This actually gives me an opportunity to talk about the new film that we're working on, because because basically I sent you a link, a Dropbox link to a PDF about the new film. So if you share that, people can reinforce what I'm about to say about the new film by looking at this deck, this very nice visual deck. And on the last page, there's a link for donations and some information. So that's probably the easiest way, and you can pull the link out of that if you'd like. But, you know, basically, as I said, every time I finish a film, I take a deep breath for a little bit. But even when I'm finishing a film, I'm thinking about the next project. So Intelligent Lives was broadcast nationally on America Reframe, which is a great primetime PBS series in 2019. And we had over almost 500 events around the country with that film, live events before COVID. And I personally presented at probably about 80 of them. I mean, I've been to probably 45 or 46 states at this point presenting. And with Intelligent Lives, it was like a year long. My wife was like, okay, we can't do that again. That was too much travel. So it's kind of nice. One benefit of COVID is being home a lot these days and not traveling so much. But anyway, that film came out, and I started thinking, oh, what's the next project? You know, where's this going to go next? Samuel is really interested in filmmaking. He's got all this incredible things happening in his life, transitioning to adulthood. And Intelligent Lives was really largely a story about transitioning from high school age to adulthood. And all the subjects in the film were transitioning to adulthood. I did several mini films that are available on the website for free, different stories about transition. And I thought, you know, how do you figure out how to do this, right? I mean, how does a young adult like Samuel figure out how to do this? I also really wanted him to start telling his own story and me not to tell his story for him. So we came up with this concept, and the working title is the Disability Roadmap. That probably will change at some point, but that's what we've got right now. And the idea is that we are documenting together his transition to adulthood, all the things he's trying to figure out in terms of education and relationships and employment and friendships. I'm filming him. We're also using some archival footage that I have, and he's filming himself with 2 GoPro cameras mounted on his wheelchair, one facing out, one facing in. So whenever we do adventures, he's filming from his own perspective. But then he's also, we've researched and come up with, right now we have 9 people, incredible people from all over the country who experience disability, and he's interviewed them all, 9 of them. Before COVID, we went to Washington, D.C. and interviewed Judy Heumann, who's a really well-known disability rights advocate. She was in Crip Camp, the movie, and just wrote a memoir. Had a 4-hour interview with Judy, 4 hours.
Wow.
And the next day, we interviewed Bob Williams, who I mentioned earlier, the administrator in D.C., who uses a communication device. So we had Samuel and he speaking with their communication devices, a 2 or 3 hour interview with him. And then since then, we've done Zoom interviews for now, although we hope to follow up with in-person interviews with Ali Stroker, who's a Tony Award-winning actress who was in Oklahoma, won the Tony for her role in Oklahoma, uses a wheelchair. Maysoon Zaid, who's a comedian, Palestinian-American with cerebral palsy, a comedian, and some not famous people. I interviewed a guy named Tariq Zabuza for part of the Who Cares About Kelsey project. I interviewed incarcerated youth and asked them what led them down that path and what made a difference. And Tariq did this incredible interview when he was 20 years old from the state prison. And about a year ago, I was able to track him down and find him out of jail, doing great, 5 years out. and Samuel just interviewed him for about 2 hours about his mental health issues and what led him to substance abuse issues when he was starting at like 10 years old, you know, drinking and other issues. We have a young man, Andrew, in Indiana, who's dealt with fetal alcohol syndrome. He was born with fetal alcohol. We have an incredible woman with autism, Lydia XZ Brown. I should say she's non-binary. She goes by they. They go by they. Sorry, until I'm 55. You know, it takes a while to get used to it. But anyway, they are an incredible autism rights advocate. And so anyway, that's just a taste of it. And you'll see in the PDF that his story, Samuel's own story, will weave around these interviews. So I'm really taking myself out of this film, except for as a director, co-director with Samuel and producer. And it's really his voice, all the voices of the people he's interviewing. And even we're going to have at least 50% of our production and outreach crew. We're going to be paying and hiring people with disabilities to do the work. We have an advisory board we're building solely of people with disabilities. So this is a very much of a nothing about us without us story by and for people with disabilities.
I love that term. Nothing about us without us.
Without us. I love
Beautiful.
that. This is probably kind of tough to answer. So I'll ask anyway, just because you're in the middle of production, but when do you anticipate that project being ready for release?
Yeah, no, we have a schedule. I mean, we have grants that we've gotten that they're based on schedules. We initially we were looking at about 18 months from now. I think it's going to be pushed back a little bit farther because of COVID, because we really want to get on the road and do some of these interviews in person as soon as we're all safe. As everyone knows, it's tricky. But we are right now. We're actually producing a sizzle reel. You guys are kind of in the business. You probably know sizzle reels, but those who don't know what that is, it's like a 10-minute preview of the film. We're literally, I was working on that all day today, and I'm working on it full time right now with my editor, great editor James Rutenbeck in Boston, who's also edited Intelligent Lives. And that'll be done in about a month and a half. And we're going to start showing that and sharing that publicly. So if anyone goes to our Facebook page for Intelligent Lives or signs up for the e-newsletter on the Intelligent Lives site. The Intelligent Lives site's our most recent film, so that's probably the best place to go. They'll be notified. Or my Twitter, you know, underscore Dan Habib on Twitter, or Dan Habib Films on Instagram. Any of those channels, your preferred method, you'll know when this comes out and when the sizzle reel is available, and we'll keep you posted on production.
And folks can make contributions to that project.
Yeah, we very much are excited and welcome and appreciative for support. The easiest thing would be to look at that PDF you guys are sharing, and there's a link on the last page for contributions. And, you know, listen, people give $25, $50, that has an impact. Some people are giving $50,000. We've gotten 2 people now have committed to be executive producers at the $50,000 level. That obviously makes a big impact, and we honor them in very significant ways. So I'm just letting people know that any contribution of any level to your ability is tax deductible, and it really has an impact on our work. And then you become an even more integral part of our community too.
Can I know as we're getting kind of closer to the end of our show, I want to ask about Betsy and your older son, Isaac.
Sure. Isaiah. Yeah.
Isaiah. I apologize. Just a little bit. Give us a little flavor of them and how they've experienced you and Samuel and this life.
Yeah, I just had a long talk with Isaiah today. He is just getting over COVID, so he's had his own journey the last couple of weeks. He lives in Flagstaff, Arizona. He's doing well. He's doing really well. He said he feels back to himself today, but he was feeling pretty sick for about 4 or 5 days. About 10 days ago. Anyway, we can all know somebody, right, that's dealing with this.
Right.
He is an amazing young man. He's about 6'4", extremely fit, athletic, rock climber. Graduated from Prescott College in Arizona and studied. Is a really big outdoorsy kind of guy, but he really studied more of almost like political economic theory, and is very interested in just challenging the way the world works and looking very critically at the world in every way. His first major job out of college was supporting young kids elementary and middle school and high school age with emotional and behavioral disabilities. So he's been doing that for the last year. Wow. And it's a very intense job, as you can appreciate. It's very demanding, not very well paid, but he's learned a ton, and he's decided at this point he'd like to go to graduate school for social work and just kind of continue the thinking around this. But in the near term, he's actually given notice of that job because he's just kind of burned out at this point, and he's going to be a salmon fisherman in Alaska this summer.
Cleanse the palate a little bit, but right.
but he is going to come home. We haven't seen him in over a year because of COVID, and so he's
Sure.
going to come home for a month. So he's an amazing guy, and I mean, I just think from the sibling perspective, it's a very big challenge, right? I mean, Sean, I can't even imagine with the size of your family, but we had a hard enough time just with 2 kids trying to give them both the attention that they felt like they deserved, and we certainly didn't always succeed. We did our best. But and I think he had developed an incredible amount of sensitivity, compassion, ability to love, ability to have patience through his relationship with Samuel. They're still very close. But there were times that were hard, I think, that he didn't get the attention because we were so consumed with Samuel's needs. So Betsy and I, we worked really hard together to both be a team and kind of project manage all the family needs and the medical stuff and everything, but also just like go away together and be together and spend time ourselves and have date nights. And, really, I think try to work really hard on our relationship. We've been married 28 years now, and, things are, knock on wood, things are going great. And, but we're kind of ready to be more empty nesters. So the big thing in Samuel's life is that we are actually building an addition onto the other side of our garage. That's going to be Samuel's own house. And he will have his dedicated space without us in his face, and he can bring over friends, girlfriends, and whatever, have parties, and we're not going to know or pay attention, and we'll have our own space. So that's a big move that we're breaking ground next week on that. So there's a lot going on.
Fantastic.
That's beautiful.
We talk about that at home all the time, and we actually did a show where the entire episode was like, how do you love your children differently but equally, because they need different things. If you have one child or more that has a disability or special needs, and then you've got other neurotypical kids, and that doesn't go away. And so, we've been very blessed. So it's always interesting to see how that works. How does that progress with? There's one other sibling as well, correct?
No, just the two.
Just the two of them.
Just the two.
But I think it's also worth noting, and I'm sure you've talked about this, that there's a tremendous amount of stress on a family when you have a child with a disability or health conditions and health issues. And I think that, Betsy works full time also. She's a professional fundraiser for nonprofits. She does amazing work for arts groups, environmental groups, all kinds of different organizations. So I think it's important that we're constantly trying to figure out how do we support each other, and how do we not take away from what makes us happy and feeling fulfilled by taking too much of the oxygen in the family, for whatever it is, for your work, for your personal side projects, whatever they might be. I mean, I just want to be honest and real that it's not always easy. I mean, there's a ongoing discussion I think every family needs to have, is like, how do we keep this going? How do we keep ourselves feeling somewhat balanced? And then you throw in COVID, and then you throw in, for some families, economic stress from COVID or other issues, or you throw in health crises or behavioral crises or whatever might be coming up. It's tough, right? It's tough to manage. We feel really lucky that we have jobs, and that we can have jobs that we can work from home right now.
For sure. I think it would probably be worthwhile too. We'll talk about this off camera, but for Isaiah, our guest we had on last week, Mark Esposito, is started out working with children with disabilities. He's transitioned into now working with adults going through transition. 29 years old, volunteers to be a member of this community. It's a little bit different than those of us who were dads. But just an amazing spirit, amazing energy. It might be as after he's done salmon fishing, maybe is a good resource for Isaiah to talk to. Our goal is to connect people, with this platform.
We'll connect you guys regardless.
National Sib Shop network, which you may have heard of, is called Sib Shop. We never actually participated in it, but I've heard great things about it as a outlet for siblings of kids with disabilities.
Good to know. Sib Shop. That's fantastic. Well, as I said to you before, like, you look up at the camera and we're like, 53 minutes have gone by already. It just goes so fast, and I'm so fascinated. I spent a lot of time in the entertainment industry and working with filmmakers and documentary filmmakers as well. So I love the work that you're doing. I say, because I'm old now, I cry at everything, but your films are definitely moving, and they're so heartwarming and give hope and real, raw, authentic storytelling. So you're doing a beautiful job, and I want to support you any way that we can, and hopefully this will get out to an audience that will help support your efforts. So thank you for being here, Dan.
I appreciate it.
Gracious, you're a gracious guest, and we're honored that you spent an hour with us today, and hope that we get to have more conversations with you as time goes on.
I hope so too. You're right. The time did fly. I really enjoyed every minute of it. Thank you.
It's crazy, great. And so as we get ready to sign off, for me, I'm grateful to the people in my life, to my daughter Jordan, who my oldest, who was dealing with learning disabilities, who teaches me how to be a real human being on a daily basis, and to my other children, Gabby and Blake, who are neurotypical and amazing beings. I'm so grateful for them as well. And Sean Francis, my partner in this, in what we do here together here, and then in our business as well. Grateful to you as always. And I always tell people, this is especially at this particular time when everybody seems to be kind of going off into their own little islands. Empathy and love is the thing that bonds us all together. So wherever you're dealing with an issue that you're unfamiliar or uncomfortable with, think about it through the glasses of empathy and love, and the world will look a little bit different. So grateful to you, Dan, for being here. And Sean Francis, as always, grateful to be in partnership with you. If you want to sign us off tonight.
I will do so. Thank you so much for being here, Dan. It was a tremendous conversation. And I know that as much as you're used to it, as much as we told you beforehand, it still probably went by a little faster than you thought. But it's a good example of, what I heard and I talked just this past week, which is that, life or time can be long or it can be short. When we have no purpose or, we're bored, it goes by at a crawl. When we're engaged in purpose and spending time with people that we love and exchanging energy, it tends to go by fast. And I think for most people would be a lot happier at the end of the day when you take that last breath and it went by fast, but you know what kind of purpose you filled your life with, and memories as well. So I want to thank the women in my life, my mom and my amazing wife, Laura. Without them, I would not be here. I want to thank everyone that continues to tune in on a regular basis. We are now, as Brian mentioned, on even more platforms. Thank you, our audience, and WSDX. We're now on Amazon, Stitcher, and I think 3 or 4 other platforms as well. We got added to a couple more this week, but it's all because of your support. And we want to just make sure that we shine a light on as many people as we possibly can, and let everybody know again, somebody somewhere needs to know that you care. Somebody someplace needs to know that they matter. And for lack of a better word, it's as true as it is corny, but love really is the answer to everything. So thank you so very much. And we'll see you guys next week. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, everybody.
I really enjoyed it.